Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Weber back with you live at CPAC, and I'm thrilled to have with me, joining me now, Dr. Robert Malone, the founder of the Malone Institute, also the original inventor of the platform technology for mRNA. This doctor has spoken out early on the ethics. He's got two great books, The Lies My Government Told Me and The Better Future Coming. I'd love for people to check him out on Substack. You get over 500,000 views per day, which is absolutely incredible. And you can follow Dr. Robert Malone at RW Malone MD. That's Malone. Dr. Malone, thank you so much. It's a real joy to have you joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Well, sir, there's so much happening. The world is unraveling in so many ways. Here we are just 3 years since COVID first, or we're coming up, I guess, on the fourth year here since COVID was introduced. Yeah. And I look at where we were just a few short years ago and where we are today. For those that are tuning in, so many of our members, over 2 million strong, are concerned if they made the right choice to either forego getting the vaccine or getting the booster. Many are saying, should we have a booster? And I'd love for you to give your perspective, your opinion on things and how things are looking, because it does seem that COVID itself is no longer as much of a threat as it was. Perhaps that's just because more and more people have developed some sort of immunity. But specifically as it relates to the vaccine itself, could you share some insight?
So I'm a vaccinologist. I've spent my entire career, held multiple positions in industry, nonprofits, supporting the government in this area of biodefense and vaccine development and vaccine technology. And as a young man working at the Salk Institute in the molecular virology laboratories, I had a series of discoveries that led to the foundation technology for the mRNA products. So I understand this space. I've been at the forefront of helping companies and the government respond to, I think, 5 different outbreaks. So I'm very familiar with biodefense, outbreaks, and infectious disease, product development, vaccines. The important thing in evaluating any vaccine is the risk-benefit for you. Not the risk-benefit for the entire population, not the risk-benefit for children, but the risk-benefit for you, because you're the one that has to make the decision about whether or not to take the vaccine. And so as we're talking to a more elderly cohort, which I'm a member of, I'm not a spring chicken either, it's important to think about what are the data about your risk of both the infectious disease and the product. All pharmaceutical products, all vaccines have risk. If you drink too much water, there's risk. There's a fundamental principle in vaccinology and pharmacology. Everything has some degree of risk. The question is, how big is the risk of the product and the type of risk, and how big is the risk of the thing that you're trying to protect against? Let me illustrate the point. If you have cancer, and you only have 2 years to live, you might be willing to take a product that would give you an extra year of life, but if you happen to live for 8 years, it might cause some other kind of cancer. That might be a good trade-off. Depends on your disease, and you should be informed of what those risks are so that you can make decisions together with your doctor about whether or not taking this product makes sense to you. So all the way through, beginning in the very early days, for instance, I had a teleconference with Nancy Pelosi early on, in which I pleaded with her to get the CDC to stratify the risk of SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 by age, so that we would know what is the risk for a young child, what's the risk for a average middle-aged person, what's the risk for an elderly person. Because that's necessary to make decisions not about the whole population, we're not CDC, but about your risk, whether or not you should take this product. At first, the data seemed to indicate that the risk of the vaccine was much lower than the risk of SARS-CoV-2. in an elderly population. The elderly, absolutely, particularly the very old and obese, people with diabetes, certain types of cancers, immunosuppressive conditions, these were the people at highest risk for death from SARS-CoV-2. And then as time went on and we accumulated more and more data about the vaccines and the safety of the vaccines, to my evaluation, I used to suggest that children should not take these vaccines because they're at very low risk for death and disease from COVID. But the elderly, it still seemed to be the case early on, that the elderly were partially protected and at highest risk, and they should probably go ahead and continue to get the vaccines. Now we have a lot more data about the risks of the vaccines. And to my eye, what those data show is that when you stratify the risk of the vaccine and stratify the risk of SARS-CoV-2 by age, unfortunately, the risks of the vaccine increase as you get elderly. As you get older, the risks of the vaccine increase, and the risks of COVID increases. So then it's kind of a race. It's a balance. Which one increases more? Does it really make sense? What's your risk and what's your benefit? And unfortunately, the data that I've seen suggest that the risk of the vaccine is greater than the risk of the SARS-CoV-2 disease, even in the elderly.
This is so interesting. And what I find fascinating and almost mind-boggling is that this seems like lots of common sense here. You have a tremendous background. You understand your research. You understand medicine. After all, you are the original inventor of this platform technology of mRNA. Why is it that ordinary folks that want to have this discussion are somehow shamed in American society, and that, platforms such as YouTube and Google and such want to shut down this conversation entirely? We're just looking for truth. We're looking to educate the American public.
Well, more than that, you're looking for informed consent. It's your right to be fully informed about the risks of a medical product that you would accept. If you go to the doctor and, in an elderly cohort, they're well aware of colonoscopy, and they remember that when they go for their routine colonoscopy as an elderly person, which you should have, your physician or surgeon or gastroenterologist will read you a statement about what the potential risks are of colonoscopy, and you have to agree to those risks before they will do the procedure. That's called informed consent.
Yeah.
They're obligated to be fully open and transparent about what your risks are. But in the case of these products, that has not happened. In fact, the government has actively blocked disclosure of important information about risk like myocarditis. This is well documented. We have detailed timelines of how Rochelle Walensky and others have chosen to not disclose about risks to the general population under the belief system that these vaccines are safe and effective. Remember, how many times have you heard safe and effective, okay? That's called neurolinguistic programming. That's a form of mind control. When you're given these simple statements again and again and again, they get into your brain, and they prevent you from actually asking critical questions, which you should be doing because it's your body.
Yes.
It's your health. It's your right to know. Okay? But the government has actively restricted your ability to know. They have controlled the information. Matter of fact, there's an agreement between the U.S. government and the British government that both will suppress information about vaccine risks. Okay? So what has happened is that a group of technologies and capabilities having to do with censorship and what's called cognitive warfare, or you can think of it as a form of media hypnosis that was developed to prevent Russian disinformation affecting elections, has been turned on the civilian population. So the government has a very, very well-developed toolkit and interface with all the social media companies, and they have used that to suppress any discussion about vaccine risks or harms. And that's why you're not allowed to, is because the government doesn't want you to discuss those things, just like they will censor anybody who's had a vaccine injury from talking about it, and they will censor groups that have been set up on Facebook. Those groups will be deleted and deplatformed. That's by intention, and it's basically wrapped up in the idea the government thinks they know what's best for you.
And we see this in so many areas of our lives. And I think that, it's not the way that people want to think. It's not the way we want to view our government. We want to have some level of trust. And I think that's why a lot of people do have this cognitive dissonance around these issues. They'll try to find ways to justify why they're thinking the way they're thinking, because to face the truth is so difficult and so hard.
Yeah.
And it's almost impossible to wrap your mind around it. Quick question before I move on to your books. I want to talk a little bit about your books, but there are young families out there who are being pressured to vaccinate their children before they can send them off to school. The schools are saying
pressured. In many cases, they're required.
Correct.
And most of the top drawer universities still require the full series of SARS-CoV-2 vaccination.
So what should people do when their own conscience says, this doesn't feel right, I don't want to do this? This is a tough time in America. It sure is. Personally, as an employer, I told my people, we are not mandating a vaccine. I was able to do that by the grace of God. I was in a position where I could do that for my people. But there are young people who are their back is up against the wall. What kind of message or message of hope might you give to people that might encourage them in some way?
Well, hope is a different thing. In terms of your conscience, your rights are to control your body. You have the right to control any medical procedure or drug that's administered to your body. Don't give up that right. It's a difficult right and wrong decision. I made a wrong decision. I accepted the first 2 doses of Moderna, and I was damaged. I still have heart damage from having done that. Now, I rationalized it because I needed to travel, and you couldn't travel internationally unless you had the jab. I also had long COVID because I was in the first wave of infection with the original strain, the Wuhan 1 strain in Boston. I was in Boston, and I got very, very sick, thought I was going to die. And I developed long COVID, long-standing, and I had risk factors. I was more obese then. I had pre-diabetes, and I had this long-term syndrome, and it was talked about in government circles and on social media that if you took the jab, it might help you with your long COVID. I also had talked to a variety of my colleagues. Remember, I'm a specialist in this, but I had gotten out of the field in the 90s, late 90s. But I talked to colleagues, and they said the problems that I had found in the 90s had been overcome. I talked to the individual, Peter Marks, at the FDA that was specifically responsible for Operation Warp Speed and for licensing these vaccines. And he told me there was nothing to worry about. Okay? But I accepted the product, as have many, and I was harmed from it. I have not taken anything more than booster number 2. But even somebody that knows as much as I know was convinced by the lies that were put out about this product. And I made a mistake, so we can all make mistakes. But if you're a young person particularly facing these decisions, be aware that you are in the highest risk group, particularly young males, for having heart damage from these products. And there's just a paper that just came out in the journal called Vaccine. It was CDC funded, to the tune of $10 million, an international consortium that took government data and hospital data from across the world. 99 million people, analyzed that data, and has proven that all these data underreport the risks, and yet still it was clear that the vaccines have a major risk for myocarditis, pericarditis, central venous thrombosis, that's blood clots in your brain, Guillain-Barré syndrome, this is a neurologic syndrome, central nervous inflammation, a variety of other diseases. Okay, so this is proven now. And if you're a young person, you're at the highest risk, but particularly young male, that includes young adults up to 35. You're at highest risk for myocarditis. Now, they told you a lie. They said the myocarditis is transitory and mild. It's not. They didn't know the data then. They had no right to say that. That was another lie. Okay? They didn't have enough time, just like they didn't have enough time to know whether or not these products were safe in pregnancy. They told all of us they were safe in pregnancy. They told us the myocarditis was short-term and mild and transient. But now the data are in. It's not. That was a lie.
And we see these cancers, it seems. I personally have witnessed a number of people within my small, group of folks that I know that have come down with all kinds of strange cancers, even lost an associate at a very young age from 6 weeks, fine one day, 34-year-old woman, gone in 6 weeks. Rapid lymphoma of some sort.
The term that my colleague Ryan Cole came up with, who's a highly qualified pathologist, is turbocancers.
Yeah.
And this is right out on the edge of current knowledge. And what's these observations that you and pathologists and surgical oncologists are making seems to be fairly widespread, but there isn't really solid randomized peer-reviewed research yet documenting this. And there's a lot of disincentives to even say what you just said. That's not allowed to be said.
I understand.
And physicians that say those words get attacked. Okay? But, and in some cases, it's the actual pharmaceutical sponsors that are behind those attacks, surreptitiously by hiring agents on social media, et cetera, to make these attacks on people. So we can't yet say for sure that there is a correlation, but we do know that there are data demonstrating that these products have characteristics and components that could plausibly cause those kinds of cancers. We have these observations of these kinds of cancers. So we're kind of in a position where it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, but we can't yet definitively say that it's a duck.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about your books. One of them, Lies My Government Told Me, and the second book, The Better Future
Actually,
Coming.
that's a title. That's the whole title.
Oh, the whole title.
The second book we're working on right now is about psychological warfare and rogue government.
Okay, so folks, it's so important because you are a genius. You've got so much great information. I want to encourage people, follow Dr. Robert Malone. You can follow him at R.W. Malone, MD. You're putting out so much great stuff. Tell us about this book, Lies My Government Told Me, The Better Future Coming.
So this is published by Skyhorse. It was Tony Lyons. It was kind of a follow-on to the Bobby Kennedy book, originally, The Real Anthony Fauci, which I helped edit. Bobby's a friend. Tony Lyons, the publisher, is a friend, and he encouraged me to write this book, as did Steve Bannon. Basically the origin of the book is that my wife and I write a daily Substack. So you can find that at rwmalonemd.substack.com. So daily essay that comes into your email. You don't have to pay for it if you don't want to. And in that, we started really on a daily basis to document the lies we were encountering and tried to make sense out of what was happening to us, beginning basically around the time of just before the Joe Rogan podcast that became so popular.
Yes.
And right after the Brett Weinstein Dark Horse podcast, where Steve Kirsch and Brett and I talked about the jabs. And so we started putting out these essays on a daily basis, and then had encouragement that we should write a book. And so we decided to kind of serialize the book. So that became the basis for the chapters. And what it really is a real-time account of our journey trying to make sense out of the COVID crisis, trying to make sense out of things like the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab and the censorship and Tony Fauci and what went on at NIH and all of these things that contribute to the COVID crisis that we've all lived through. So a lot of people find it helpful. It's not a small book. It has a lot of detail, and it's produced by 2 academics, so it's highly referenced. But if you can parachute into any one chapter if you wish.
Wonderful.
It's organized into 3 sections around the idea of how a physician approaches a patient. So if you come to me as a patient, the first thing I do is I listen to you. I ask you your story. I ask what your chief complaint is, where your pain is, what's happened to you, okay? So that's the history and physical. The next thing I do is I examine you. That's the physical exam. I say, what is actually happening to you? What are your symptoms? And then the last part of the interaction with the physician is the treatment plan. What are you going to do about it? So that's the structure of the book. The first third of the book is people talking about their own experiences. People like Pierre Corey and Meryl Nass and Matthias Desmet and our own experiences of being censored and propagandized and defamed. So the first third is people's direct experience during the COVID crisis. And then the second part is all about, what does this mean? How do we make sense out of this? It talks about inverted totalitarianism. It really introduced a lot of things into that we now accept as part of our daily dialogue when we try to talk about the government and COVID crisis. And then the last part is where the hardest part for me to write, the better future coming. What can we do about this? What are the changes that need to be made? For instance, we talk at length about Schedule F and Donald Trump's plans to reform the bureaucracy. We talk about the corruption and the revolving door at the FDA, etc. So that's the structure of the book, and it can be kind of thought of as a way to understand, comprehend, process all these confusing things that we've all experienced.
And it is so important that you're getting the word out and that people just, feel encouraged. And this, you've answered my question about hope. It's right there in your book, The Better Future Coming. Dr. Robert Malone, thank you so much for being here today. I do hope to have you back with us again soon on this podcast.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for taking the time to listen.